Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, anyways, I thought that I would give my little fight review of the Devin Haney versus JoJo Diaz fight, which ended up happening today. I believe the Gervonta Tank Davis versus Isaac Cruz that fight ends up happening tomorrow. But I will not be able to see that one, so hopefully I'll be able to see it a little bit later on and then maybe get my own fight review. But, anyways, I totally forgot that the Devin Haney versus JoJo Diaz fight actually ended up being on today. I apparently just missed it, but I did end up hearing about it within the past couple of days. I apologize for not being able to give out my fight prediction, but my prediction for this fight was that Devin Haney was more than likely going to beat JoJo Diaz or Joseph Diaz, whatever his name is, more than likely by unanimous decision, or more than likely by late round stoppage, somewhere around the 10th round. Devin Haney to me doesn't really seem like he has a great power, but I thought maybe that he would have the size over JoJo Diaz. When JoJo Diaz and Devin Haney actually were fighting in the ring together, they actually looked pretty much the same size. Now, apparently, JoJo Diaz, he apparently moved up in weight to take this fight with Devin Haney, but he actually he looked naturally the same size as Devin Haney to me in here. Both their power seemed about on the same level. When it came down to it, I thought that JoJo Diaz, that he had a chance to win this fight, but when it comes to certain big fights, boxing or MMA or even in sports in general, there's an old saying basically to where uh fortune favors the bold, or when it comes down to it, this is what separates the boys from the men, or the men from the boys. And Jojo Diaz, I think that he's a very decent fighter. I think that he's probably a B plus fighter to B grade fighter. I don't think that he's an A grade fighter. I think that this was a very good win for Devin Haney's resume. But I mean, and a certain amount of people may disagree with me saying this, but I mean, that's not really saying much, because I don't think Devin Haney really has a lot of elite names on his resume, but it just is what it is. That's not me saying that Devin Haney is not decently talented. I was very decently impressed with his last performance over Jorge Linares. Now, of course, I said that in my opinion, Jorge Linares was pretty much done at that point in time in his career. He had been knocked out, I believe, out of two out of his last four fights. So Jorge was not really at the best point in his career. But all in all, the way that Devin Haney was able to completely outperform him, and the way how fast he looked, and all in all, even with a little bit of the power that he had, and with how well he was off the jab, and just how slick he looked, I thought that he looked really, really good. And I gotta say, Devin Haney, even though I thought that he clearly won this fight, I think I scored this fight either 9 rounds to 3 or 8 rounds to 4 for Devin Haney. Some people had it 7 rounds to 5. I can maybe understand that, but I don't think I can have it that close. I would have to agree with the judges on this one. I think that 9 rounds to 3 or 8 rounds to 4 is probably more accurate. Jojo Diaz, the thing is about him, man, is that, and certain people may disagree with me when I say this, it was a little bit frustrating to watch at times, because I thought Jojo Diaz could have possibly made this a little bit of a more competitive fight. And that's not me saying that the fight was not competitive throughout a lot of the rounds, because there was a lot of the rounds where it was very decently competitive, to where it's like, okay, both of these men are in the fight. But like I said, there's a saying to where it says this is what separates the men from the boys, or the boys from the men, because Jojo Diaz, he fought like a little boy in this fight. And what I mean by that is that he fought scared. And a certain amount of people all know, they're not going to agree with that. They're going to say, how can you say that? He went at him the whole entire time. And all in all, he had to deal with Devin Haney, who's very highly skilled. Well, I think Devin Haney, I think that he's very physically talented for the 135-pound division. I do think that he has a tricky style. I do think that he's somewhat of a slickster. But after looking at this fight, I don't think that Devin Haney is a fighter that has A-plus skills. I think that he's too defensively irresponsible. I think all in all that he does not cover up extremely well. I think that he will have problems with more defensively responsible fighters, or fighters that may have the same level of skill set. Unfortunately for Jojo Diaz, I just don't think that he laid all of his cards on the table. Now, whether he thought he was going to be able to get on the inside with Devin Haney and maybe get some counters, and maybe Devin Haney's movement threw him off, maybe that's the reason why he didn't throw a lot, I don't know. But the thing is that JoJo Diaz, I don't know what the hell his corner told him. I don't know what his coach told him. But if he thought that he was going to defeat Devin Haney by outboxing him or trying to outbox him in the middle of the ring, you're a damn fool. You're not going to do that when you're the same size as him. And on top of that, Devin Haney has the speed advantage over you. I believe he has the reach advantage over you. You're not going to outbox him while you're in the middle of the ring, because you're not a Manny Pacquiao. You're not a Floyd Mayweather Jr. You're not someone, all in all, that is an expert at angles. You're not an expert counter puncher. You're not on that level. It just is what it is. And, another saying, certain people have to know their limitations when it comes down to it. One of my father's favorite quotes, a man has to know the limitations. And JoJo Diaz, I thought that he fought scared the whole entire time when it came down to it. Don't get me wrong, there were certain rounds where he came out and he really tried to rough Devin Haney up, but I thought that he could have made this fight a hell of a lot closer. Instead of this fight potentially being 9-3 or 8-4, I thought that you could have potentially made this possibly even a split decision. I did not think that this fight was going to be that competitive, but looking at it, Devin Haney had a lot of problems with JoJo Diaz. I think that if JoJo would have jabbed at the body more early on, I think that if he would have double jabbed, I think that if he would have went to a body attack early on. Another thing also is that he had to be first at certain times. And you're just not going to beat your opponent by staring at them. There's very few fighters out there that are able to win fights, especially the bigger fights in their career, and they're not the ones throwing punches first, at least some of the times. And a good example that I'll point to is when Guillermo Rigondeaux fought Nonito Donaire. When Nonito Donaire would land a punch on Guillermo Rigondeaux made sure to land, if not, one punch back, a couple of punches back, couple of good power punches back to show the judges that I am in this fight, and not only am I in this fight, I am in control of this fight, and whatever shot he lands against me, I'll give it right back to him. Guillermo Rigondeaux, he knew that he had to really muster up the courage, to really beat Nonito Donaire in that fight. You're not the champion in this fight. You're not the favorite. You're not the A-grade guy in this fight. And JoJo Diaz had to have known that. I just think that, maybe the movement, maybe the speed threw him off. And I just think that JoJo Diaz knew from the start that he was not going to be able to compete with Devin Haney in that category. Like I said, I thought that, there were certain rounds where he showed a lot of, oomph. I think there were certain rounds where, I don't want to say that, I think there were certain rounds where he showed that he had a lot of heart, that he showed that he's not, a C-class fighter. I do think that JoJo Diaz is a decently skilled fighter, but it was kind of, it was unfortunate on JoJo Diaz's end, in my opinion, that he did not really let his hands go. And that's what separates the greatest of fighters from just the good fighters. JoJo Diaz is a good fighter. He's not a great fighter. Now, for example, we've seen a great fight between Sean Porter and Terrence Bud Crawford, I believe just a couple of weeks ago, I believe on November 20th. Now, Terrence Crawford, he had a lot of problems with Sean Porter early on in that fight, but one thing you notice about Terrence Crawford always is that he's going to tune up the pressure or turn up the volume to whatever degree that he needs to in order to adjust to the opponent. And sometimes that means that you're going to have to risk getting, hit. You're going to have to risk taking a punch, possibly to give one. That means that sometimes you're going to have to turn up the tempo in order to gain this guy's respect. And I think that he gained Devin Haney's respect to a certain degree, but not enough to the point to where Devin Haney was not winning the rounds. JoJo Diaz, in my opinion, he had Devin Haney at times on the ropes. He just would not throw anything. A lot of the times he would just stare at him. And that's a big part of the reason why he lost this fight. Devin Haney, though, let me not be too hard on him. I do think that Devin Haney is a very talented fighter. Do I believe that Devin Haney, all in all, is going to be a future top 10 pound-for-pound fighter? Well, I think that it's very possible, because I think that he'll at least be there for a short period of time, because I think that if he gets a win over George Cambosis Jr. or possibly a win over, let's say, Vasyl Lomachenko, that he possibly could be on that list. I think that when you take a look at the 135-pound division, Unless we're talking about Gervonta Tank Davis, I don't see any fighters there that, in my opinion, could definitively beat Devin Haney. Would I be surprised if George Cambosis or Vasyl Lomachenko beat Devin Haney? I wouldn't be surprised. But when I take a look at Vasyl Lomachenko for number one, I think Vasyl Lomachenko, even for how talented he is, and do I believe that Vasyl Lomachenko all around is more skilled than a Devin Haney? Yes, I do, but I also think that Vasyl Lomachenko all around is more skilled than a Teofimo Lopez. So my point being is this: Vasyl Lomachenko, we're just talking about his individual case. Let's say a Devin Haney versus Vasyl Lomachenko fight were to happen next. Do I see Vasyl Lomachenko definitively beating Devin Haney if he's able to let his hands go? But Vasyl Lomachenko overall showed that in the Teofimo Lopez fight that he was not as great as many of us thought him to be, because he was not willing to exchange with Teofimo Lopez in the early parts of that fight. And I get it, Teofimo Lopez has one-shot knockout power. Maybe he'll be willing to do it more with Devin Haney because Devin Haney does not have that type of power. He has B-grade power, in my opinion, about B to B minus power, somewhere around there. If someone were to say B plus power, I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with that, because he obviously stumbled JoJo Diaz a couple times. You know, he has some sort of power. It's just not A grade. I can't put it in the A grade range. I would say it's B to B minus power. But Vasyl Lomachenko, he would have about a 5 to 6 inch reach disadvantage over Devin Haney. And on top of that, even though I thought that his comeback fight against Nagatani, who's a very decently dangerous, I'm not going to call him a journeyman, but someone who's a somewhat of a dangerous bottom contender within the 135-pound division, I thought that it was decently impressive. But Lomachenko, he has to throw consistently. And if he's going to beat someone like a Devin Haney, just like JoJo Diaz, you have to throw consistently. Now, Lomachenko, his feet, in my opinion, and his offensive skill set, of course, is much better than that of a JoJo Diaz. And his power, all in all, in my opinion, actually is A grade. Lomachenko, in my opinion, actually all around has more power in his hands than what a Devin Haney has. Lomachenko is a very gifted athlete, but will he be able to beat someone like a Devin Haney? That depends. Are you going to have, the offensive game plan to beat him? We'll see what happens. So I'm not going to say that Vasyl Lomachenko, in my opinion, would definitively beat him. Let's talk about George Cambosis, who is the new, recently unified 135-pound champion. Do I believe that George Cambosis would definitively beat Devin Haney? No, I don't. In fact, I would probably bet Devin Haney to beat George Cambosis. There's a certain amount of people after this fight that say, oh, George Cambosis, after the performance that he had over Teofimo Lopez, he's going to beat Devin Haney, I think George Cambosis is an A-minus fighter. I think that he's a decent fighter. I don't think he's going to beat Devin Haney. It's not that George Cambosis is not a decent fighter, but he also has a similar problem in not throwing enough punches at times. I've seen it in certain fights against Lee Selby and Mickey Bay. Now, he threw enough to beat Teofimo, but a certain amount of the rounds, Teofimo was really almost doing nothing in those rounds. He was pretty much just staring at him because he was afraid of the counters. Will George Cambosis be able to counter Devin Haney like that, especially George Cambosis, who is a fighter that loves to keep his hands down, just like Devin Haney and just like Teofimo Lopez? Those three guys actually fight very, very similar. The difference is that Devin Haney, in my opinion, is probably the fastest out of all of them, has the best jab out of all of them, in my opinion, and on top of that, has the best reach out of all of them. I do not see George Cambosis beating Devin Haney. That does not mean that I don't see him giving him some competitive rounds. But to be quite honest with you, there's no fighter that, in my opinion, is at 135 pounds right now that is definitively going to defeat Devin Haney. There's only one that I would definitively, in my opinion, say would beat Devin Haney, and that would be Gervonta Tank Davis. Now, Gervonta Tank Davis would have a little bit of a reach disadvantage and, of course, a major height disadvantage over Devin Haney. But Gervonta Tank Davis is one of those special athletes. He's almost like, I don't want to compare him to Roy Jones Jr. quite as of yet, but the reason why I compare him to that is because Roy Jones Jr., he started off at middleweight at the early part of his career. Now, he was better in stature, in terms of reach, and in terms of height for his divisions than what a Gervonta Tank Davis was. But Roy Jones Jr., when you talk about his power, when you talk about his speed, he had A-plus speed and A-plus power. Gervonta Tank Davis is very similar in that category. And on top of that, he has A-grade skills. So if Gervonta and Devin Haney were to fight, I don't think Devin Haney would beat Gervonta. I'm not really even sure if Devin Haney would survive the whole entire fight. I think Devin Haney is too defensively irresponsible. I think if there is something that ever would save Devin Haney from even getting stopped in that fight, it may be his height. I don't think Devin Haney is as skilled as Gervonta Tank Davis. I don't think that he would beat Gervonta Tank Davis. I'm not really even sure if Devin Haney would beat the one dude who was on the undercard. I believe that one dude's name, Mr. Love. I can't remember the dude's name. It's not Micah Love. It's I can't remember overall the dude's name, but the dude all in all who fought that one Mexican fighter also beat Ivan Baranchek in his last fight. I actually think if Devin Haney were to move up, that would be a very great fight between Devin Haney and that one dude. I think all in all that would be a great fight. But do I believe that Devin Haney all in all can unify the 135-pound division? I believe that he can because, in my opinion, George Cambosis, even though he is a great fighter, I don't believe that George Cambosis, in my opinion, is going to beat Devin Haney. That's just my personal opinion. Vasyl Lomachenko, he may have a better chance, in my opinion, than what that of a George Cambosis would, just because of his skill set and his power, and he's more defensively responsible than that of a George Cambosis. If you were to talk about 140, then I think that's where the real threats are. Then you're talking about a Gervonta Tank Davis. Then you're talking about a Regis Prograis who could potentially be very threatening, or a Jose Ramirez, or possibly Mario Barrios, but I really don't put him on the elite level. Josh Taylor, of course, is a very big threat, one of those fighters. And if Haney eventually moves up to 147, the contenders are going to get even more competitive. So we'll see what happens. Haney, I think, is a talented fighter. I think that he's a talented fighter, but a lot of people, of course, early on, they love to compare him to Floyd Mayweather Jr. I think the only fighter that has come out of the Floyd Mayweather Jr. camp as of recently that I really would 100% compare to Floyd Mayweather Jr., at least in terms of both offensive and defensive skills, would be Gervonta Tank Davis. And I'm not going to compare him 100% to Floyd Mayweather Jr., but in my opinion, he is the most talented fighter to come out of the Mayweather gym or out of the Mayweather corner, in my opinion, out of the past 10 plus years. And that means a lot, because in my opinion, he's more talented than Devin Haney. He's more talented than Errol Spence Jr. He's more talented than any other fighter I've seen come from the Mayweather gym besides Floyd Mayweather Jr. for many, many years when it comes down to it. So Gervonta Tank Davis, in my opinion, he's on another level. Now, Devin Haney, the question is for him, can he get past George Cambosis? Can he get past Vasyl Lomachenko? Ryan Garcia, Josh Taylor, possibly Teofimo Lopez if he's able to come back. Although, I don't know, because that was a brutal loss that he had. Even though it was close, in my opinion, against George Cambosis, he looked absolutely horrible in that fight. I don't think there's any other way to put it. So we'll see what happens for Devin Haney, the Dream Devin Haney. Hopefully he improves his skill set a little bit, because I think that he's a decently talented fighter, especially when you talk about his athleticism. But I got to see more improvements. I got to see better defensive responsibility. He can be hurt when it comes down to it. I think that he had a little bit of problem with JoJo Diaz's defensive responsibility because he kept his hands up a lot, which is something that not a lot of fighters like to do. And possibly could it have also been because JoJo Diaz is a southpaw, or was a southpaw for this fight? Very well could be. So it'll be very interesting to see him in fights against, say, a Josh Taylor or a Regis Prograis, who I think is a southpaw. Don't quote me on it, though. I can't remember. Or Gervonta Tank Davis, or someone like a Vasyl Lomachenko, or a Josh Taylor, any of those fighters who I believe fight in the southpaw stance. So it would be very interesting against any of those fighters, especially those fighters who have similar size to him. So Devin Haney, he's going to have to watch out in future fights. He's going to have to be better than this, in my opinion. I think that, he trained hard for this fight. Now, could he have underestimated him? Maybe, but I don't think so. Devin Haney doesn't come across to me as a guy that underestimates people. I think that he wanted to go for the knockout tonight. He wanted to put on the best performance that he could. He tried for the knockout, but Devin Haney, he's not a knockout artist. He's not a guy that can usually get the knockout. Devin Haney almost reminds me of kind of like a lesser version of Demetrius Andrade. That's kind of what he really reminds me of. He's got, decent boxing skills, not the same boxing skills as Demetrius Andrade, in my opinion. And he's got okay power, but it's not great power. Not even on the same level as Andrade has for his divisions. And he doesn't have bad power. It's just not great power. But when it comes down to it, that's pretty much my whole entire review for this. Thank you all so much for watching. Congratulations, of course, to Mr. Devin Haney. But in my opinion, I think that he can beat George Cambosis, which, of course, as of right now, is the fight that only matters to him. I do think that later on, when you face those A to A plus fighters, like a Vasyl Lomachenko or a Tank Davis or a Josh Taylor or someone else that may be more similar in size that has an A+ skill set, or not an A+ skill set, but a B+ to at least A grade skill set, you're going to have to be very careful against those fighters, because Devin Haney does have a problem with defensive responsibility and he can get hit. So it's going to be very interesting to see. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.